What's up, YouTube? This is 82 and 0. Welcome back. So, a topic I want to talk about is Oscar Robertson. I know I've covered him quite a bit on my channel. I talk about him quite a bit, so I probably annoy you guys with how many videos I do, but this is a serious topic I got. What's the case for Oscar Robertson as greatest point guard of all time? Because, a lot of times people now are saying Curry's the second best point guard of all time. Some are even saying he's the greatest point guard of all time. But right now, the consensus greatest point guard of all time is Magic Johnson. And, I remember probably 2 years ago, I got into a pretty heated argument with somebody who's a pretty big Magic fan. He just was convinced there's no argument for Oscar Robertson. And I'm not here to tell you that there's not an argument for Magic over Oscar, because I'm not mad if somebody says Magic is the greatest point guard. I'm not mad if somebody says Oscar. I'm just here to tell you why I think Oscar Robertson has a case for greatest point guard of all time. Okay? Just hear me out here. Because where people go with it is the accolade argument. Magic has 5 championships to Oscar's 1. But let's break this down. Oscar played in a time before free agents. It's not like he could just go sign with another team, And unfortunately, the franchise he played for, the Cincinnati Royals, they were an extremely cheap franchise. He had some good teammates, Jack Twyman, Jerry Lucas, but the problem was back then, all the other teams were stacked compared to him. He would always get bounced by the Boston Celtics. And when there's no free agency, it's not like you can just make the team better and have somebody come to Cincinnati. You had to rely on trades only. And the thing about Oscar Robertson was, I'm not going to cover it in the video. He had a falling out with Cincinnati. He got traded to Milwaukee. He got lucky and won a championship. And you saw him adapt his play style to play with Kareem. He quit scoring as much, he let Kareem handle a lot of the scoring. So he is a champion. His one ring to me, okay, and I know I could piss a lot of Laker fans off with this. His one ring to me holds up in an argument against Magic, because Magic played on some more stacked teams. Yes, they had the same teammate when they won, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but Magic, he consistently had the greatest rosters, How many Hall of Famers did he have? Let's think about this. James Worthy, he had Byron Scott, Michael Cooper, Sometimes they would get free agents like Bob McAdoo to come over there and come off the bench. These were stacked teams. So you can't really fault Oscar for not having as many championships. And if your argument is that Magic is a greater player because he has 5 championships, what if Oscar was on the Celtics in the 60s instead of the Royals? Would you rank him higher? And, MVPs. Magic has 3. Oscar has 1. So you could say, well, Magic's a greater player. But here's the reason why Oscar's MVP means more to me. Is in that era, you were only winning an MVP if you were a big man. Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell. He broke that streak and won MVP. And I think Oscar is a much more well-rounded player. He was a great scorer. He could get up to 30 points per game. He's very efficient. He was going to give you in the 48 to 50% range. And, he could shoot from all over. He had a good mid-range game. They didn't have the three-point line back then, but he had range. He could bring it outside. His career average in field goal shooting is 48%. And another reason why I think these players get compared a lot is they were both big point guards. You know, obviously Magic was bigger, but Oscar was definitely a big point guard for his time. And getting back to the being more well rounded, I'll give the edge to Magic Johnson on passing. I don't think anybody is as good of a passer or playmaker as Magic. That doesn't take anything away from Oscar. Oscar was an elite playmaker. They were both great rebounding point guards, because they're both big point guards, But let's look at career averages. Oscar, 25.7 points per game to Magic's 19.5. But also, I will say that doesn't mean Magic is a bad scorer. Like I said, he had a lot of stacked teammates, so he didn't need to score as much. Oscar had to handle a lot more of the scoring, but to be honest, Oscar was a better scorer. Hands down in my book. Rebounds per game. Magic had 7.2 to Oscar's 7.5. Assists per game. Magic had 11.2 to Oscar's 9.5. Steals per game was a little misleading because they didn't keep track of steals until Oscar's last season, and he averaged 1.1. So I think it's fair to assume in his prime he would average much more. Magic averaged 1.9. I think it's fair to say that Oscar could have had somewhere in that ballpark a little more. Oscar was the better defender, better scorer, and there wasn't really a lot of weaknesses in Oscar Robertson's game. You can't really say there was an area that he struggled on. So sometimes I don't like the argument about accolades as being the only reason why a player is better. That's like saying Robert Horry is a better player than James Harden because he has 7 championships and Harden has 0. And I'm not mad if somebody says Magic's the greatest. I'm not mad if somebody says Oscar's the greatest. I'm just here to present the case that Oscar was a better all-around player. He could do more. He had less help. It's not like he could get free agents. Now, if you would have put him on those Lakers teams in the 80s, right? Let's say Oscar was drafted in 79-80, like Magic was. He probably could have had 5 or 6 championships, He had a little more longevity, but I'm not going to fault that to Magic for the obvious reasons. And, people would be saying Oscar is the greatest point guard of all time. So the GOAT argument isn't always about accolades, how many championships you have. Sometimes you have to look at the context of a championship or an MVP. So what are your guys' thoughts down below? Who's the greatest point guard of all time, Magic Johnson or Oscar Robertson?